Hi everyone, and welcome to part 3 of 10 Things Stop Motion Pros Do. This series of videos is about helping people to make better stop motion animations, and although I'll mostly be illustrating the tips with clips from Brickfilms, all of the tips apply to all kinds of stop motion, not just those made with Lego. As with my other videos, I'm not claiming that these 10 things are the only things that you need to do to make your animations look professional, but I hope that using them will help you to make some improvements. I talked in my previous video about having a good story, and it's a good idea to have a script and a plan for everything that's going to happen. But to plan really well and to help you set up your sets and lighting correctly, you need to storyboard. Storyboarding means drawing out a series of pictures, one for each shot that will appear in your video. You don't need to be good at drawing, the pictures just need to be good enough so that you know what is in each shot, which objects appear, where in the shot they'll appear, how close they'll be to the camera, and what movement is going to happen. Doing this forces you to think in very specific terms about what you want your final video to look like, and then to prepare accordingly. Suppose I want to make an animation of a man stepping out into the road and then getting hit by a truck. My written plan might simply be this. But when I storyboard, that's when I decide what my viewers are actually going to see on the screen. It might look like this. Or it might look like this. Or it might be like this. Of course, you can make good animations without storyboarding, but if you do skip out this important step, you're missing out the part where you plan how your video is actually going to look, and that means you're more likely to be disappointed by the end product. Onion skinning is a facility that's available in some stop motion apps and software. It allows you to see a translucent version of the last photo you took over the top of the live camera image. This means you can easily compare the positions of objects in your previous photo with the one you're about to take, so you can get just the right amount of movement and in just the right direction. It's also really helpful if you accidentally knock your camera or your set, because it helps you to get everything back into exactly the right position. When you start out in stop motion, it feels like a challenge to animate a single character moving around and interacting with their environment. But as you start to work on more complex animations, you'll need to figure out how to have more than one thing moving at the same time. The simplest example is having two vehicles moving at the same speed. Slightly more difficult is animating two characters walking towards each other or side by side. But where things might start to really feel tricky is when you have different things moving at different speeds and with different kinds of motion. Although it might seem intimidating, if you know how to animate this, and you know how to animate this, and you know how to animate this, then you do actually know how to animate all three of them together. Just remember that when you animate things separately, you're free to use any frame rate you like and speed it up or slow it down to get it to look right. But when you animate things together, you need to make sure the relative amount of movement is correct. If you're animating the car on its own, you're free to do this and use a frame rate of 96 frames per second. And in the next shot, you could animate the man like this and use a frame rate of 12 frames per second. But if you're animating them together, and the man is walking at a normal speed, and the cyclist is going at a leisurely pace, and the car is whizzing past them, then your car needs to move a lot between each frame, and your bicycle needs to move a moderate amount, so that they'll look right with your man, who you're animating at a walk cycle that's designed for 12 frames per second. Getting the right amount of movement for different objects moving at different speeds at your chosen frame rate will take a bit of getting used to. And if you're struggling to get it right, then don't be afraid to actually calculate how much each object should move and measure it out using a ruler or using markers on your set. When you animate the movement of an object, your natural tendency might be to keep the object the same shape the whole time, like this. This gives the impression that your object is rigid and inflexible. Sometimes that might be what you want, but usually you'll want to apply squash and stretch at different points within the movement to show that the object has some flexibility and life to it. The classic example is a bouncy ball, which moves like this. stretching as it falls, and squashing as it hits a hard surface. How much squash and stretch you use tells the viewer about how soft the object is and how heavy it is. In some forms of stop motion, you may be working with objects that can't be squashed or stretched in quite this way, but there will still be times when you can apply this principle. Masking is a well-known technique for making things fly in stop motion. The basic principle is this. First of all, you take a photograph of the scene without the flying object in it at all. Let's call this your blank background. Then you take photographs of the flying object supported on a pile of Lego bricks or attached to a piece of wire or rigged up in some other way. Then you erase the rigging or supports in each photograph by simply layering it over the blank background and using the erase tool in your editing software. It takes a little while because you have to edit each frame individually, but when you're done and put them all together, it looks like magic. Masking is a very useful tool because it isn't just for making things fly. You can also use it to animate diving off a diving board, throwing an object, shooting an arrow, or even just a particularly bouncy walk or run. Exaggeration is a technique that you can use in several aspects of your stop motion. For example, you might use exaggeration in your set design. If your animation is about two friends, one rich and one poor, you can exaggerate the difference in the size of their houses or the quality of their cars to make sure your viewers immediately catch on. You can use exaggeration in your dialogue and story, but most importantly, you can use it in how you animate the action. If a character is happy or excited, don't just give them a slight smile. Go all out and give them a big grin, a head pop, and make them throw their arms in the air or run around. And exaggerate the individual actions themselves too, and the reactions to them. It makes your animation more dynamic and fun to watch. Of course, not every stop motion needs to use exaggeration all the time, or even at all. Subtlety and understatement can be just as effective, depending on the style and genre. In a western or a horror, for example, you might want to draw the viewer's attention to small movements and slight changes. But even in these genres, you can improve your animation by using exaggeration when it comes to things like jump scares and fight scenes. In my previous Stop Motion Pros video, I talked about easing in and easing out, which is an important technique to master if you want your animations to look smooth and natural. Anticipation is related to ease in, ease out, but it refers to something that happens before the main action. For a punch, if you animate it like this, it looks unnatural. You need to add in a bit of swing before the punch. And this is somewhere you can use exaggeration too. Of course, in real life, you wouldn't see someone swinging their whole body and bringing their arm all the way back like this. But in animation, you need this to show the power that's going into the punch. Staging refers to the way you guide your viewer's attention throughout a particular shot, and there's a number of different aspects to how you do that. To understand these, let's look at an example of good staging and an example of bad staging. In the bad staging example, we had a serious case of distraction. Whilst it's fine to have other things moving around in your shots, you don't want things happening that distract from the main action. There was also some blocking, with this bus stop being placed unnecessarily in the foreground. We also had both the man and the truck entering from the wrong side of the set. We barely get to see the man before he buys his newspaper, and we don't know that there's a truck coming until after it has hit him. And in any case, we were probably distracted by looking at the man running off to the left. To achieve good staging, decide where you want your audience's attention to be and then plan the shot composition accordingly by removing blockages and distractions and allowing space for your movement. And remember that if your character's head turns in a particular direction, your audience's attention will move in that direction too, anticipating that something is going to happen in that part of the screen. Directing your audience in this way means your video will be easier to watch and viewers won't miss the action. There's nothing wrong with using digital special effects, either downloading ones that others have made or creating them yourself. and these can look very professional, but nothing looks better than really well executed physical special effects. Some of these techniques are widely used, such as using cotton wool to represent smoke, or flickering orange light and tissue paper or translucent orange Lego bricks to represent fire. These are easy to try out even if you're new to stop motion. Other things like huge explosions take a lot more planning and practice to master. Everyone will have their own opinions on when you should use digital special effects and when you should use physical ones. Some people prefer the look of a muzzle flash of a gunshot to look like this, whereas others prefer the effect to look more like this. There's no doubt though, whatever your preference is, that mastering the art of physical special effects can take your animations to the next level. One thing that can often get forgotten in stop motion is the importance of showing the personality of your characters. I was going to say the importance of showing the personality and emotion of your characters, but of course, for some characters, it is part of their personality that you don't see their emotions. One way of showing personality is what characters say and how they say it, but equally important is their body language and how they move. With some forms of stop motion, including brick films, you have some limitations on what you can do that are set by the points of articulation on your characters, which is to say, the parts of your characters that can move. On a Lego minifigure, there are only 4 basic points of articulation: the neck, the shoulders, the wrist, and the legs. You can also get movement with the hair or headgear and with the waist, as well as with some accessories. But there are still plenty of ways of expressing emotion and personality. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope these 10 tips were useful. If you want to know more about any of these things or have any suggestions of other tutorials that I should do, please let me know in the comments. If you haven't seen my first 2 videos in this series, do check them out as they each contain 10 more stop motion tips. And there's plenty more videos on my channel that you might enjoy, including some silly stop motion Noobs videos, plenty of stop motion and brick film tutorials, and some of my own brick films too. I also have lots more stop motion and brick film tutorials planned for this year and beyond. Subscribe to Puffin so that you don't miss them.